Okay, we're going to get started again with our next panel, so please simmer down, take a seat. Okay. So for our fourth and final panel of the day, it's going to run a little bit differently. Still the same format in terms of we have a moderator and panelists, but with this panel, what we've really asked for is reflections on what has been said so far, and how those how what's been heard, what's been discussed, really translates into recommendations and thoughts on next steps for the state on these issues. And so it's going to be more dynamic and interactive. And our moderator for this session is one of my board members, Joaquin Esquivel, the newest board member on the State Water Resources Control Board. And he is going to lead us off. Joaquin.
Thank you, Max. And I have to thank staff again for putting together what has been a pretty fantastic day. When you look at the scope and breadth of the presenters, the ideas, and the information that's been shared, it's been a pretty meaty day. And then so thank all of you as well for sticking in. And now coming to our last panel, where we really are trying to synthesize some of the discussions that have happened today, some of the ideas, and really get to the heart of the matter, and that is AB 401 and how we move forward on. And just for a quick background, again, for those of you who were here during Senator Dodd's presentation, it was Senator Dodd sponsored the bill, got it into legislation, and it directs the Water Board to develop a report for the legislature for the implementation of a low-income rate assistance program for the entire state. I was just talking to Max, and over the last 2 years, have held well over 15 plus various workshops, discussions, meetings with folks. And in that time, certainly last year when I attended our most recent 2-day workshop with stakeholders, the complexity of the task at hand is really apparent. Whether you're talking about how we fund the program, how we implement it, how the benefit gets to ultimately the individuals it's supposed to be helping, all we found was increasing complexity. So actually our deadline was to have that report to the state legislature earlier this year, and we're going to be taking a little more time. And this symposium is part of that time. So without talking on for too much longer here, I'll really quick introduce our panelists. We're very fortunate to have here Adan Ortega, who is the Executive Director for the California Association of Mutual Water Companies. To his left is Laurel Firestone, who is the co-founder and co-director of Community Water Center. And to her left is Debbie Cherney, who is the Deputy General Manager at Eastern Municipal Water District. And so what we have here at the panel is representatives then from privately owned water companies and the public, and then a very strong advocate and who has her pulse on a lot of the discussions out there. So Adan, any sort of first thoughts from what you've heard today, and give us your insights.
Thank you very much. I'm also honored to be here and thankful to Max and the staff for everything they've done to organize this, and to my fellow panelists whom I'm honored to be here with. Richard Nixon once said that you don't appreciate the heights until you've dwelled in the depths. I've been in the heights of water with the Metropolitan Water District. I sat for a brief time on the Water Commission. And currently I represent the smallest entities in California, over 320 mutual water companies. I really appreciated the comments this morning, particularly from Gary Brown, who indicated that it is a mistake to look at this proposition about affordability and the human right to water as a matter of charity. It's a feeling that I've often reflected in various forums that I've participated with. And I think that this symposium is a component of what ought to be a broader symposium about the human right to water in California. It is not the only case that affordability is something that is associated with the human right to water. The truth of the matter is, as we've seen in the last year, as I'll illustrate in a few moments, even wealthy people confront periods when they don't have access to safe drinking water, for their basic needs because of something like an emergency. Currently, FEMA is spending a lot of money in restoring water service in very wealthy areas in Montecito, up in the Napa Valley where they've had devastating fires. And we're not sitting around saying, well, why are we subsidizing those folks? The fact is that we already have mechanisms that are paying, for that system or those systems to be restored so that everybody can have the right to affordable water for basic needs. You have immigrants, for example, who move into various parts of California, into some of the older parts of the state that already have dilapidated infrastructure where the water comes out of the pipes brown and sometimes a little smelly. And you have these cases across the state where the immigrants that populated places like Lincoln Heights in Los Angeles are now being replaced by the people that are gentrifying those communities, and they too are inheriting old and dilapidated systems that they can't afford with their tax base to clean. Maybe not in the city of Los Angeles, but it's certainly happening in other parts of the state that don't have the tax base to repair that. And then I think the one that's the most delicate that I really struggled with is our regulations. We have a regulatory regime, as Bruce Mackler illustrated earlier, that impose some extraordinary costs on communities that were going to try to comply with the standard for hexavalent chromium. And in compliance with these standards, we saw some of the systems that had less than 200 connections face the burden of $5,000 a year to comply with that standard. Is that a violation of the human right to water? It's a complex question because some people would say, well, hexavalent chromium could be a threat to human health over the long term. But on the other hand, what good does it do you to reduce that risk over 1 in a million over a number of years when the people that are in these small systems today might be facing acute threats from things like nitrates and arsenic, and there's a trade-off that they have to face. No community should have to make a choice between complying with one regulation that's supposed to safeguard them and their health over another, because these costs are cumulative. In each of these cases that I've illustrated, their experiences, as we saw illustrated today, that affect the rich and the poor. And the human right to water should not be relegated to a debate about how much we should subsidize the poor. My final point is that I thought that the examples primarily from Philadelphia, where people have to make a commitment to stewardship when they are receiving a public benefit that allows them to pay their water bills, is a fundamental thing. And I think the real choice that we have to make here is not whether we want to all enjoy, regardless of income, safe and affordable drinking water for our basic needs, but who's going to charge for it? I think the tension in the room amongst the water suppliers and the fact that we're here in Sacramento is that when you say the ratepayers should pay, you've got water board members that face the burden and general managers of angry residents calling them because somehow we're raising their rates to give their money to someone else. Or should it be the state legislature through the tax system? It's the same people. It's just the question of who gets the glory or who gets the blame. And in the cases that I illustrated regarding emergencies, regarding aging infrastructure, everybody's already assumed who's paying for it. And that's why we're not saying anything, because whoever was going to get the blame was already blamed. So I leave you with those thoughts, and I look forward to the audience and my colleagues here on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Adan. Laura?
Really appreciate, Adan, your comments and everyone spending time today to focus on this issue and really get into the weeds. This was just incredibly rich panels and discussion already today, and looking forward to continuing after today as well. When when I look at the issues that we're discussing today, I think we can't look at the issues of water access, water safety, and water affordability in silos. They're inherently interconnected. And similarly, there's no silver bullet that is going to solve all of them. And so it's appropriate to be looking at those together, but also important to peel back the onions in the ways that they're distinct. And I think the first panel really helped us start to do that. And recognize that we need to address affordability at a system level or utility level, and that is essential to be able to ensure that customers and ratepayers and everyone in California can access safe and reliable water service as one half of the equation of affordability. That water provider cost question, and then also the distinct but interconnected question of individual ratepayer affordability. And so in my mind, we can't talk about ratepayer affordability without having the tools and funding sources to address sustainable, safe drinking water at the utility level. And so, a lot of, as I think probably everyone that's participating in this knows, we've been long for the past, since probably before we passed the human right to water here in this state, working on trying to address this fundamental barrier of a secure and sustainable funding source to ensure everyone can access a basic amount of safe and affordable drinking water. We have a proposal now around a safe and affordable drinking water fund. And that funding piece needs to be complemented with source water protection and stewardship, and consolidation and institutional capacity and implementation. But today's discussion also helped us look at that second half of the equation, which is around individual ratepayer affordability, and helped tease out some of, probably even more challenging onion core, I don't know what's the metaphor here, of income and wealth disparities and poverty in this state, in this country, that mean that how people experience water rates in terms of cost burden is really different, and has really different implications. And so I think in that half of the equation and as we're trying to address that issue, it's similar to the utility and system level in that there's not going to be one silver bullet. We can't expect a water ratepayer assistance program to solve our poverty challenges in the state by themselves, but we are going to need a program that has a variety of tools, rather than think that there's a silver bullet. But we also need to come to terms with the fact that we are going to need funding to pay for this, and we can't get around that. I think it will require resources, and it will require fundamental shifts in how we're doing water financing to solve this, rather than continuing to think in just a really narrow definition of cost of water service for an individual or within a particular jurisdiction. I think one of the things from the morning panels that really was inspiring is that there's many water agencies that are already starting to acknowledge that we are in crisis. This problem is getting worse. In order to solve the vicious cycles of, whether it's individuals losing their home, losing their water service, or losing the ability to pay for other basic needs, or systems unable to provide safe water or water at all, that ultimately we're all better off if we can stop the vicious cycle, step back and look at how we can all be part of a solution that solves this for our state. I don't, pitting rural versus urban or a certain class of customers versus another is really only going to I think, help keep us in this vicious cycle that we're in. It also isn't, as some of the panelists were able to show with data, is not good for the bottom line. And so having it's time in my mind for all of us, including and particularly water providers and ratepayers, to be part, to acknowledge that we're all part of this very fragmented system right now, and we have to be part of the solution, including part of a funding solution that helps us get to over this the largest political hurdle, which is who's going to help pay for costs. And I would also say by being part of paying for costs, you also have the ability to help really shape how we're going to make sure that any program is successful, that it's really able to meet set performance measures, and that there's a real commitment to stewardship and success. So those are my overall comments, and look forward to getting into more details.
Thank you, Laurel. Debbie?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I suppose I should introduce Eastern Municipal Water District just very, very briefly. We serve a population of about 800,000 in western Riverside County. That's about 145-ish water connections and about 225,000 sewer connections. We're both a wholesaler and a retailer on the water side. I'm really privileged to have had the opportunity to work on this water affordability topic since last year. It's absolutely been one of the highlights of my professional career, and I've learned a lot along the way. And I think we genuinely care about finding a path forward. You know, water agencies often get the, you guys just fold your arms and say no to everything. And I don't think that that's what's happening here. I think we're genuinely trying to find a path forward that we think is workable. And, you know, not to take exception with Adan, but I don't think it's about glory or blame. I think it's about trying to find a path forward that is built on a strong foundation and that is efficient. On a statewide basis. We've talked a lot today about how California is different. It's fragmented, patchwork were some of the words that have been used a lot today. We also have a constitutional constraint in terms of cost shifting. We have a Proposition 218 challenge, and most of us don't have enough non-rate revenue to be able to support a low-income rate assistance program within our service areas. We mirror the state at Eastern. We have right about a third of our population would be eligible at the kinds of eligibility levels we've talked about throughout the last year. And the reality is water rates are going up, sewer rates are going up. They're going up because costs are going up. It's pretty fundamental. I think we need to focus on what is practical and what's efficient. You know, retrofitting 3,000 billing systems throughout the state is very, very costly. I love the idea of data sharing. We've talked a lot about how important that is. And when the UCLA Luskin Center first launched some of its concepts right about a year ago, it was a year ago, February, they talked about the notion of potentially, you know, using the CARE programs to do that. And I thought, gosh, this is terrific. I'm going to call Edison, and I'm going to find out what they have available for me because we have a budget-based rate structure. We like it because it gives our customers a lot of control over their bills. And I wanted to take the data from Edison on who's enrolled in CARE, promised them I could protect that data from Public Records Act requests. And Edison gave it to me in zip code format. And I said, well, yeah, that's really not helpful because it's not going to help me take that and share it and concatenate that data at a household level to really understand, is this working? And Laura Feinstein from Pacific Institute talked today about budget-based rates being a non-subsidy way of dealing with low-income rate assistance. And I was really, really happy this morning. Let me finish that part. So Edison said, oh, we can't give it to you at the household level because the CPUC has a policy that says we're not allowed to share it with the public water systems, public water agencies. And I said, well, but you share it with the IOUs. And they said, well, gee, sorry, that's our policy. So I grabbed Martha Guzman-Aceves this morning, and she assures me that she's going to help me work on this, at least on a pilot basis, so that we can study this and figure out how effective it really is. I think that, we already do a lot in this space, and Laura's, I can't wait for her new study to come out. We talk about how do we give customers control over their water bills. Of course, budget-based rates, we think, are our most effective tool at Eastern. We have targeted programs on devices, multifamily properties where we do device, not just rebates, but actually actively go in and replace older devices. But Eastern is a younger agency relative to many, certainly relative to Detroit and Philadelphia from this morning. We're making a very significant investment in automated metering infrastructure. This allows us to do a lot of programs around leak detection, letting those customers know by text message, by phone call, by email, hey, we think you have something going on at your property that you're going to want to fix, or you're going to have a bill at the end of the month that's going to be a problem for you. And we also want to make sure that we don't have water losses. So that's something that we've invested in that's working really well in this space. And I love the comments from Detroit particularly about how we need to recognize that good business management has a direct connection with rates, right? Whether it's the affordability question or whether it's a broader question. For example, we need to have good cost management. High bond ratings directly translates to lower debt service costs. That's not by accident. We need to make sure that we're working with our customers on payment plans and other things relative to the option of shutoffs, which is absolutely not our first choice, or our second, or our third, or perhaps even our 10th. We recognize that regulatory costs can really push against all of this, and that's a real challenge for us here, for all of us on a statewide basis. I think one of the things that I struggle with, both in terms of the utility side or system financing, or the individual ratepayer financing and affordability questions, is if we are talking about providing that subsidy rather than these other things that we talked about, and that subsidy is an ongoing subsidy potentially in perpetuity, we're really taking away the incentive for some of these systems that probably should not exist. They probably should consolidate, reform, transform, whatever words you want to use. The reality is that the service delivery model throughout the state is broken in a lot of places. And we have a lot of high redundant overhead. We've got to tackle this foundational challenge and then figure out where the rest of this fits in. If not, we're just building on top of a broken foundation. So, I don't want to be the water agency that folds my arms and says no. We absolutely are committed to trying to work with the water community, to work with everyone else, to find solutions. But we want to have a balance. And clearly, this is really complicated.
Listening to the presentations today, one of the takeaways that I got as well was it's not necessarily just about what is the rate ultimately to the end user, but what is the process by which the program is implemented around them. That, when it comes to fees, late fees, mounting interest then on debt that's owed for a water bill. Just looking at the examples in Maryland, obviously it's a pretty complex landscape and depends on which municipality you're in, et cetera. It'd be interesting to see what sort of analyses would sort of turn up for us at the state. But how do you all see, I guess, not just, again, the narrow issue of what a person is paying insofar as for the water, but how the system is being administered to them? And I think this gets to some of Debbie's point about not everyone is in Eastern Municipal Water District. We're very lucky to have some incredible water districts in the state that are real leaders, that are, budget-based rates, that are being innovative, and many times, sometimes have their own low-income rate assistance programs. But for those that don't have that, there is this inherent tension, I think, from a feeling from the water community that, we're trying to pursue a command and control, top down, tell you what to do, and how you manage your water systems. And I don't want it to seem that way. But how do we, I guess, look at the data and at least come to some common understandings about how the program should be administered to prevent people from kind of falling into this poverty trap around water particularly? But thoughts?
Thank you. Well, mutual water companies parallel the affordability quandary because our customers are our owners. Mutual water companies are owned by shareholders. As shareholders, they have direct responsibility for the maintenance of their systems. So what it essentially means is that if somebody's too poor to pay their water bill, they're also too poor to contribute to the family of shareholders to fix the system. And we find that this affects people that maybe even exceed the poverty line. Because what happened with the mutual water companies is that most of the well-established ones that have the economies of scale to operate properly were founded like in the 1890s and the early 1900s. We had a housing boom where many developers found a shortcut towards getting water by not paying the cost of joining a larger system. So we've come back full circle. They installed a well and then left the residents, to their good or bad fortune, depending on what the regulatory environment was at the time. So what we find with mutual water companies is that the system integrity is a direct reflection of the residents' ability to pay. I can point to some cases in Kern County, for example, where you have a group of mutual water companies, there's about 3 of them, that have high levels of arsenic. Their best option would be to consolidate to a larger mutual that's near them that is, well, not that, the closest larger mutual company that's near them, but it would require construction of a 6-mile pipeline. So at a cost of about $1 million and change per mile of that pipeline, you're leaving these residents who have a median income at about $61,000 a year. There's about 200 homes that would face the $6 to $8 million burden of financing that pipeline. So that's not very feasible. And so you find that in a more acute level when you have poor communities. But I think that as you drill down to this equation, you're going to have more examples of where there's factors that are influenced by the state that the state could help to address simply by having what we call plan compliance when you set regulations. So that by the time, we're not saying don't adopt the regulation, what we're saying is by the time the regulation comes into enforcement for the smaller systems, have your technical assistance program ready to go. Make sure that you know who it is that needs perhaps to be consolidated and have that plan ready. If you're going to do a grant, make sure that that grant is ready to go. We had contemplated introducing legislation this year that would take us there, but we felt that with the ruling on hexavalent chromium, there will be an exercise on affordability guidelines, and that perhaps we would make headway through that avenue instead. So we're hoping that there would be an active dialogue given everything that's happening on the affordability front.
I can add a little bit. I think there were some really good takeaways from the many panels and work that's been going on. I mean, I think we all want to have things be data-driven and have, I think it's really important to set clear performance measures and standards, and then be able to measure whether we're meeting that and improve things if we're not. So that requires being able to have a clear measure of what are we talking about in terms of affordability at both the system level and the individual level, and then be able to collect data or measure whether we're performing at that, or any program we have is able to meet that. I really appreciated that. Well, sort of a note on that, though, is that, I think that there's, on one level, I think water providers and any actor doesn't want to be told what to do, also doesn't want to be told to, doesn't want to be given unfunded mandates. And so I think what that means is that we need to define what our basic standards are for our society. I think that's part of what is the role of government. And then those of us, including the water providers and private sector and the public sector, need to figure out how we're going to be most effectively get there and be given latitude to do that, but also be held to those standards. And part of that, and part of this idea of not having unfunded mandates, is having funding. And so I think there is, again, a need to make sure that we're providing a funding source that is, especially public funding, is conditioned. Nobody is providing a perpetual, unchecked subsidy source without any conditions. And I think anyone that has ever had to live in where they're accessing public assistance programs, knows that it's actually the opposite. There are so many conditions and requirements and burdens to access any kind of public assistance program. And the same is true for, as frankly a lot of utilities know, and trying to access public funding programs for utilities. So making sure that we're setting standards. I think there's actually a ton of authority that we could exercise now, more than we do, in terms of holding systems accountable for addressing some of the institutional challenges and changes that are going to need to take place. But again, holding folks accountable without providing resources is not going to be able to solve the problem. It's going to continue the vicious cycle that we're in, or without having, as Adan said, the compliance plan for how you're going to get there. A couple other things to bring out that I really appreciated from this morning around thinking about how a program could be administered is just not waiting for people to be in crisis, and really thinking proactively about how we prevent it from getting to the worst place where actually it's more expensive for all of us, and thinking about how hand in hand with assistance programs for, say, costs also come the stewardship assistance, like conservation programs, and assistance in addressing leaks and the ability to access efficiency technology that helps reduce costs and improve performance and stewardship. And then lastly, I think is, I think another big theme was just around good communication and outreach and trust. I think having, that includes having everything from being able to share data to being able to understand and interact with your customers, with your neighbors, and with the state, and having that transparency and trust in education and communication is key. There's a lot of reasons that doesn't happen, and I think we heard some about the immigration climate in our country right now, and is happening in our state. That's a big barrier to that, and criminalization of poverty. And so I think that there's a whole host of issues within that topic. But any program is going to have to be able to have a strong, robust component that builds that trust and communication and frankly needs to be rooted in trust and compassion. Yeah,
so I mean, I completely agree. I think that the the concepts we've talked about today, creating a portal where an extremely low income family really only has to go through that once, that goes through that verification where that could live. I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. I mean, I can't imagine how humiliating that must be for them to go through that over and over and over again. Candidly, from a water side, we're not qualified to assess that. And so I think that actually having that kind of common portal makes a tremendous amount of sense, but it feels like it's really far away as well. And how to access that and how to make sure that it's private and secure and stays that way, which is challenging everybody apparently these days. I think from a more practical level, if you wanted to administer something much sooner and taking really just the individual low-income rate assistance type style, without having to retrofit 3,000 billing systems, you could retrofit one, which is the Franchise Tax Board. And by the way, we learned earlier today that we have this affordability problem where, let's say we set the affordability threshold at a $50,000 per household level, but if you're $50,500, you neither get the benefit, you don't get the benefit, and you have to pay into that system. And now you've exacerbated your own family's affordability challenge with that extra $5, $7, $8 per month on your bill that you were struggling potentially to pay already. So let's use that existing framework that we have with the Franchise Tax Board and make sure that that's a dedicated revenue source. It comes in, if you're lying on your tax return, you got much bigger problems. So it helps deal with some of the potential fraud issues. And then on the delivery side of the benefit, we have a care program that has a deep penetration throughout the state. Put it there. And then it's monthly. It has a better penetration to tenants than it from the electric and gas side because of the nature of separate meters there. Where on the water side we don't really have that ubiquitously throughout the state. Max Gomberg kindly says, well, but we've lost the water nexus to that. And so I think to Laurel's point about communication and outreach and all of the rest of that, I think it would be imperative that we really tackle some of that if we were to approach that. But that could be done in the very near term. We're not talking about a long time away with a lot of cost and a lot of risk.
I think some of the discussion today has touched on that insofar as, we don't want to, and nor do we need to necessarily reinvent the wheel when it comes to a low-income rate assistance program for water, that there are plenty of programs out there that already are structured, or already are touching the same individuals that we would be looking to find benefit to on the water side. But it does become sort of a balancing act around, well, how do you ensure that it is actually going to benefit their affordability of that water? And if it's kind of commingled dollars, it kind of loses that connection. But again, not reinventing the wheel is going to be an important part of being successful in a lot of this. And that goes, again, to the heart of the data sharing issue. And Debbie, I'm really glad that you were able to bend Commissioner Guzman's ear on that, and I think there's a lot of, and there are many instances where similar discussion and similar sort of sharing of information, I think, can really ultimately benefit the program that we come up with. Just quickly to note on sort of timelines at this point internally, we're looking really at the end of the year being when we're kind of setting a deadline for us to complete this report. And so as we move forward, what we'll have are further workshops. I know there's an eagerness to look at specific language and start to actually get our hands dirty, if you will, around that. And I know that that's a commitment that staff and all of us have to doing this collaboratively. And I think that is, the hallmark of our success will be because we were able to collaborate, have honest discussions, but know that they're difficult, and the most difficult among them is the funding. Who pays will always be front and center, but I think we have a pretty strong foundation. I'd like to now go actually to questions because the most benefit, I think, of the expertise we have here on the panel and the expertise actually still in the room is the dynamic discussion that we can have here. So.
Hi, my name is Mary Wood, and I am a restaurant and property owner in El Dorado County. Some of the faces I've seen before. And I think that we are avoiding a huge amount of people who are getting unsafe water in these small associations. Unincorporated associations, we have 170 alone in El Dorado County. And as far as disparity in rate setting, there isn't any. I pay 50% of all the rate finance structure of the association because I have a restaurant. And I've asked people to help me, but I'm not saying only me. These associations have to be looked at. We have to review this. My daughter became a D1 and T1 licensed operator. We're very for educating ourselves, working with the county and the state. And we see very little transparency with the state and county and our association, there's zero, and accountability by everybody. All I'm saying, you want fair and safe and affordable pricing, you got to look at somebody like me. I've been educated. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank you for your comments. When the 14 original mutual water companies came together to form our association, we had our sights on the smaller entities around the state. And we're about to roll out a program with the American Water College that will make available continuing education credits, safety training, and leadership modules available to systems with less than 200 connections that join us at no further cost. It's a whole catalog of programs that will be available. There's no big application to file other than to tell us a little bit about yourself when you join. But our intention is to also use the larger systems to benefit the smaller systems. So we got legislation authorized to create a joint powers risk insurance management authority, which is an insurance entity that provides low-cost insurance. And so far, we've signed up over 300 entities around the state. We're available to non-mutuals like community service districts and others. But what we're finding is that we are appealing to the largest systems and the smallest systems. The in-between systems belong to Aqua, and they do a very good job serving them. But the larger systems like El Dorado Irrigation District, San Diego County Water Authority, Westlands, they're signing up with us. And the revenues that we generate from the insurance is allowing us to be able to provide this level of service to our own members. Why does that matter? Like you said, some of these systems are pretty closed and they only trust their own. And so we feel that a peer approach could be helpful in addressing some of those issues.
I just want to add a little bit around, I think your important observation, there is not oversight and even standards or requirements really set for the vast majority of our fragmented water providers in terms of rate structures right now. And outside of the CPUC regulated entities, there essentially aren't the kinds of standards around financial capacity, rate structures, and oversight and accountability. There's with public systems, you have some transparency and you have the election process, I guess, for holding folks accountable. And you have Prop 218, which has its good and bad sides. But for the majority that aren't public systems and also are not necessarily CPUC regulated, there's really no transparency or accountability or standards or oversights in the way that there needs to be. With mutuals, you have shareholders, and there's a similar process, and there's some that can, there's there's a little bit more there. But I do feel like, you know, as a state, this was really brought into focus when with the drought and increased climate change, as we're having to struggle with conservation and conservation rates and cutting back, and utilities are dealing with rate structures, and that we're going to have to, as a state and a sector, you know, address the issue of rates and financial capacity and oversight and standards. And I think whether we like it or not, that's coming, especially as we have, you know, increased costs and increased challenges in terms of financing. So,
that is a perfect segue. You know, I really believe that we need more tools in our toolbox, and we need to use the tools we already have. So we have tools, the state has tools, relatively recent tools on consolidation, both under SB 88 and SB 552, where it can deal with some of these failing water systems that desperately need help, that perhaps shouldn't continue to exist. That are utterly lacking in many cases in financial and technical and managerial expertise, and they can't attract that talent. And some of them even have people that are saying, I want to retire. I don't want to run this system anymore. And there's nobody there to step up and do that. So the state needs to use the tools it has. And I think on top of that, we need some new tools. And Eastern is sponsoring a bill along with the California Municipal Utilities Association, CMUA, which is AB 2050, authored by Ana Caballero. And that would create small system water authorities that would group up some of these systems, allow for additional voluntary folks to step into them, create economies of scale, eliminate that redundant overhead, which in some of these small systems can be 60 to 80% of every rate dollar. Let's contrast that with Eastern, 11% overhead. So, you know, scale matters. I think we've got to deploy, but that's not going to work in every county, because some counties are not going to, you know, that's just not appropriate. Some need to use a more traditional approach. And then, you know, I'm going to really give a hats off to the investor-owned water space. They've done a much better job at consolidations than the public water systems have. We in the public water system space need to step up more here, I think, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that transformation, and need to.
Thanks, Debbie. And I think we at the board definitely see consolidation as an important and critical tool when we talk about addressing the human right to water. And we have those mandatory consolidation authorities are currently a little cumbersome. It's a lot of staff time. The real goal is to be able to see voluntary settlements come up more easily. Again, when the board comes in and starts telling people what to do, the reaction is usually not one of embrace and thanks. But I think that we can, but nonetheless, you know, we are taking steps to try and better identify those systems, you know, letting people see themselves, if you will, within the data, to realize that there are these economies of scale and there are these really low-hanging fruit opportunities amongst what are, you know, many and disparate water systems that can really come together and have those, again, those economies of scale in the ratepayer base to keep costs down and keep affordability up.
Hello, panel. Doug Wallace from East Bay Mud. To establish any new secure and sustainable funding source, is there any path to that that does not require a supermajority vote somewhere?
Well, I don't know if this addresses your question, but I did get an idea during the panel discussion when Tracy Patterson was asked about the number of people that are using state assistance to purchase bottled water, and it's an unknown data point. And as we were instructed by Dr. Teodoro, we should know the data. But I want to suggest there is data. When I was at the Metropolitan Water District in the late 1990s, there were studies that were done by NRDC that showed that a very large number of people of color, Latinos, African Americans, who live in many disadvantaged communities disproportionately use bottled water, that they pay anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times more than the equivalent amount of tap water that they could be consuming. And if we had the data, I think we might be able to come up with some number that perhaps we could persuade the state to pass a law that says you cannot use your EBT card on bottled water, but perhaps you can use it to pay your water bill at some amount. But I think that exploring the data that's available, exploring looking at the people that need this assistance as individuals that have preferences, that have a willingness to spend money in a certain way versus others, could be very instructive. I don't know if we could do that all in a year, but.
I think that a sustainable funding source that is that's reliable is going to need a 2/3 vote, or it can get punted down to the utilities to have to go through Prop 218, and that's not what I think any of us want, because I don't think that's sustainable or reliable either. So I think you either do it at the either way. I think you need to get a a 2/3 vote. I think there's a lot that we can do with we cannot solve this without some kind of funding source that requires a 2/3 vote. However, the magnitude of funding that we need, I think, can be reduced and focused in terms of how much we really need to raise through a 2/3 vote by addressing some of these other issues. So making sure that we have the implementation tools, that we're doing the kinds of efficiencies that we need to do, that we're using regulatory tools that we have, so that we don't have to have too big of a burden that needs to go through a 2/3 vote.
I do want to, I don't want to miss an opportunity to recognize the Community Water Center and Laurel for coming up with another measure, which is the nitrate tax on fertilizer. I know that it's been a risky venture, for an organization such as theirs, and they probably don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it for them, and I really want to recognize them because I know it was a risk within the environment that they operate on. But it did open possibilities, for other perhaps voluntary funding pools that could arise over time as the board exercises its enforcement actions when there's been pollution in the environment. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer McCoy with Diablo Water District in Oakley, California. I've been working the front lines of the water district since I was 19 years old, so for the past 17 years, and management for the last 7 years. So for me, it's not the water district's goal to turn somebody's water off. It's just not. We're not that mean. We don't hate people. We want you to have affordable water that is, safe. And it's frustrating, though, working on the front lines, that we are doing all the legwork. The customer that can't afford it isn't doing the legwork. We're the ones sending out the notices. We are the ones knocking on your door. We are the ones making the phone calls. We are the ones sending out the emails. You wait 3 months while your toilet's leaking to say something. You wait, till you can't afford your water bill. You wait to get those 5% late charges. You wait to get those trip charges, the reconnection fees, the extra deposit put on your account. But we're the bad guy. So it's like we try to reach out to those customers. So how do we do the outreach on a state level to get those people to come to us first? And that's where those of us working on the front lines, we are frustrated. And then you see all of these state bills, assembly bills coming down on us, telling us how we should do our job. And the customer's not doing theirs. They're not taking the responsibility. So in all of that, there's somewhere, I guess, a question in there. But how do we do that outreach? How do we help those customers that need a new toilet but maybe can't afford it, or fix a leak that is so minor but is making their bill more to where they can't afford it? You know, it's those small things from my level that I have questions.
I completely am empathetic with the challenge that you have. And it's much easier when we have customers who are willing to engage with us, right? So our service area is 555 square miles, and it's really expensive to roll a truck to that household time and time and time again. And we've really been trying to look at what we call customer segmentation. You know, what is the segment of our customers that requires some really specific outreach? Because I guess it's a little bit like the office where the bunch of people are leaving dirty dishes in the sink. This is probably a terrible analogy. And the manager sends out a note that says, hey, everybody stop leaving dirty dishes in the sink at the office, right? And the people who one time left their coffee cup there are the first people in your office going, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And the people who are I left my dirty dishes, my lunch dishes in there for days on end, time after time, are going, well, gee, thank goodness you're not talking about me. So outreach is hard. I mean, and in this instance, sometimes it's the customers who we most want to get to, that we're struggling most with really communicating with them and trying to help them. In many instances, whether it's those devices or leak detection or other things. I think we in the water community just have to be more creative with how we do that. We got to get a lot smarter. We have to segment it. We have to use all the tools we have in our toolboxes, whatever those look like, big agency or small agency, make the right technology investments that will help us do that efficiently. And keep at it. I mean, I don't see the regulatory environment getting a whole lot easier anytime soon. And it does kind of roll downhill on us, and therefore then it rolls downhill on our customers, who ultimately are paying a lot more to be in compliance with those different things. But, you know, the best thing I can offer is the most robust communications and public affairs teams that your agency can afford.
There was, in February, a meeting that was convened by UCLA with consumer stakeholders. And I think the subject was about affordability. And we made a special effort to get a lot of our utilities out to that meeting, even though they weren't really, the purpose of it wasn't to let them speak, because you had the NGOs and the stakeholders speaking. And the sentiments that you've expressed were repeated to me time and time again by the individuals who, the utility managers that attended the forum. But what came across loud and clear is that the reason why there could be, you know, people challenging what was going on in the water industry in general in terms of affordability and water quality was because some of these NGOs are out there talking to your customers more than you do. Or more than the utilities do. And the rule of thumb that I learned through that experience is that the utilities that have more of a presence with their customers on a regular basis, where they talk about the funding challenges, the TCP experience recently is a great example, because there's systems out there that are out of compliance. They're facing huge costs to comply. There are responsible parties that are going through the court system before the monies could be recovered to pay for the treatment systems. Those that have communicated with their customers are facing actually a good reception and public understanding of what's happening with their rates. Those that are not are going to surprise their customers when they see the bill, especially if they lose the case. And are stranded with the cost for paying for the treatment.
just adding on, I think the best way to start to try and figure out how to address the challenges is to ask the customers themselves and go and meet with customers themselves about what isn't working, and start that two-way communication. I think the more that their trust and communication need to go both ways, and it's frustrating, I know, to feel like you're the only one doing it, but I think stepping back and trying to make sure that you're creating space for communication and meeting customers where they are is the kind of environment and culture that allows folks to understand that it isn't the utility versus the customers, or it's not the bad utility versus the poor customers. It's not the customers taking advantage of the utility. It's not good and bad. It's really that we're all trying to figure out how to live in this world and make and provide safe drinking water. And I think in order to establish that kind of culture and trust, you model it and meet people where they are, and provide that kind of culture of transparency and communication. And it spreads. It's not perfect. Are there going to be folks that still don't pay their water bill? Yes. Are there going to be utilities that don't treat some customers fairly? Yes. There's as with anything, nothing's perfect, but in terms of numbers and establishing and sort of getting out of this cycle of frustration, I think stepping back and creating the kind of culture of trust and compassion and meeting people where they are is the first step to having the kind of communication that needs to be there to have everyone on the same team.
I can sympathize that, certainly there's a lot of challenges to communicating clearly with customers. And I think you look at, people's everyday lives are quite busy. And between raising families or, continuing to maintain their jobs, all these things, the amount of actual time in a day for people is pretty slim. But, I think the silver lining or the good thing, particularly, I guess, right now, when we look at California, having just gone through this drought, there's a tremendous appetite from customers, from Californians, to know about their water, to be better stewards, I think. And certainly during the drought, we saw that, and we need to, it was noted earlier that we need to carry on a sense of urgency. And I think that definitely goes to this need to continue to communicate with Californians and customers about what they can do to be good stewards of the resources within their own home, and to just better incorporate them as part of this systems that we have. So.
Just to append to that, Californians really responded in the drought. We asked them to step up in extraordinary ways, and they did, because we treated them with respect. We treated them as if they were smart and they could get it and they could understand it. We have to do more of that. Maybe not in exactly the same way as it was done, but in all fairness, had to get that one in.
Did you just ask for a mandatory reduction?
But if we treat them right and we treat them with respect, we treat them as smart as they actually are, we've got a chance here.
Good afternoon, Ray Kolish, 29 Palms Water District. Just a brief comment on today's subject matter, and it comes to treatment techniques. We talk about regulations today, and treatment techniques must be affordable and cost-effective for our agencies. That's a vital part of making our water affordable to our community. The constituents that we're treating for, the treatment processes, are getting very complex, and they're very specific to the constituent you're treating. We have one well, it's going to have multiple treatment systems, fluoride, arsenic, and the anticipation of chrome-6, because there's no one answer to treat all. So that becomes very expensive for our agency. So we encourage the state board to engage water operators throughout the state to provide our input in how we operate these systems. And when we're setting the regulations, we just hope that the regulations go hand in hand with the technology that's out there. Thank you.
And the comments appreciated. Although we're here talking about AB 401 and the low income rate assistance program, to Adan's point, and I think others throughout the day, we have to think holistically and understand that there are then these costs that are coming down that impact the affordability of rates, and how do we continue to have a more equitable system, and all of that is important.
Nicholas Schneider, Mojave Water Agency. I think my question is for you, Joaquin. We've been fairly engaged in the 401 debate, talk, discussions, and in allowing the staff to go back, rediscuss, come up with new ideas. Are you going to re-engage the water agency community and allow us to have the workshop capability to ask questions, to give our input, weigh in? I know that was a good thing, and I think that opened up a lot of eyes and turned... It gave a lot more information on how our systems are run, and kind of to piggyback on what Ray just said, it opens up a lot of doors and things that you don't think about when you're in a silo, but when you see other people, how they operate their systems, it gives a lot of information.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. Answer, yes, definitely. We staff and the rest of us at the board found in tremendous benefit and opportunity by having those conversations with stakeholders. It is incredibly complex. These systems are complex that we have. The landscape that we have when it comes to our water agencies is very complex. So how do we take that, not push that complexity aside, but actually take into consideration so that we have the most effective program possible, but simplify it for the end user? Right. When it comes to getting the benefit, again, to the people that need it most, it requires us to take those complexities into account, but then simplify them for the end user and say, well, how do we get that benefit there? And so, yes, we will have additional workshops, and there will be additional opportunity to, again, get our hands dirty with actual language and start to flesh out this report and give to the legislature our best foot forward, because it is so critical and important.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth Leeper, El Dorado Irrigation District. If you'll allow me, I might do a two-parter. So I think some of the earlier panels discussed that subsidies really is one of the answers to affordability, and that really there's other ways of looking at the affordability issue, such as the budget-based rates. So I was curious if the panel could maybe discuss some other approaches to affordability. And then in addition, it looked like we saw two models for eligibility criteria in terms of the federal poverty line versus maybe actually factoring in regional differences in the cost of living and median incomes. And so I was hoping to get your thoughts on kind of those two approaches to eligibility.
Great questions. I'll kick it over to you guys.
I don't know. Something I think is vital is for us to be looking at, I think that's what I was trying to say, not very well, but is that, you've got to look at both how we're going to reduce costs and income, right? Like how are we going to, even after you reduce costs, you increase efficiencies, you create more, ability to reduce that half of the equations. You have to have, there's also different strategies for doing the income side. So, and I think two that you mentioned are good ones. And also, as I think Debbie and others have also said, is increasing, just doing consolidations and being able to, I guess that's spreading costs, but having more folks paying in. I think that I really don't see this as, that there's a silver bullet, one size fits all. I think there's going to have to be layers of approaches that help us narrow down and also help us be really efficient and effective and targeted in those different tools each of those tools are important. That's my personal opinion. I think that still doesn't eliminate the need for some subsidy and paying some money and raising that, but I think it can reduce that burden. And I also think a lot of those other things just help us get to a lot of other goals that we also need to do. Like, budget-based rate setting also helps on a whole bunch of other levels as well, in terms of sustainability and stewardship. And so I think those multiple benefits are key and make it a reason to for us to be pursuing all of those tools and not purely a subsidy program at all. And similarly with consolidations, that also helps with capacity and other non-financial capacity issues too. So.
I would love to have something that has all of the nuances that we started to explore today, of which there are many, and how do you measure the right eligibility? How do you deal with the challenges of what works in San Diego, or what works in Riverside might not work in San Diego, or Tulare, or many other places. So I think it's important that we find some way to strike a balance between the nuances and complexity and something that's actually administrable in our lifetimes. And I think that's the real challenge that's in front of the state board and all of the stakeholders, is trying to find that right balance and then hopefully continue to iterate on that and make it better and better and better over time, with input from those of us who are in the space in different capacities.
The senator's comments took me for a loop today when he talked about what inspired his SB 998, the shutoff bill, as well as 401. And the reason for that is that, on the one hand, he was talking about the escalating cost of water, and then he said, but the regulations are getting tougher, and they're getting more expensive. And he cited the Hexchrome example, where I think he said $5,000 per connection per year. What that made me reflect on is, we had individuals here talking about the assistance for food. And if you go back to the 1970s and the 1960s, actually, when those programs began, I don't think anybody ever went to the farmers and said, we want you to create a program for low-income earners so that they can afford your food. What happened, I sat on the State Board of Food and Ag for 7 years, so you'll have to excuse my wonkiness on that front. What actually happened is that, in a strange way, we created a social compact. And that social compact told us that the basic essentials of food were hands off to the government, because we recognized that that the basic staples had to be affordable. And so you go to the store, and when you buy fruits and vegetables and milk, it's unlike anything else you buy, because if it's not processed, it has a special status. And I don't want to say it's not as simple as say we don't tax it. It's not that. It's that it holds a special place. I think that what the senator was trying to get at was something like that. He didn't say it, and I'm not going to put words in his mouth. But the fact is that water is something that we all share as a basic need. And at some point, we have to come up with a similar social compact that takes care of that for everybody, that allows the state to recognize that it could be a burden sometimes. So what did we give agriculture in exchange for having that free ride and not having to come up with the LIRA program for food? Well, you might debate whether it was the right thing to do or not, but they have the scale to produce food in the United States that today, for all of its issues, demands a lower per capita expenditure to afford. In places like Europe, you're spending 30%, more than 30% of your income on food, and we don't have that in the United States, by and large. So I think there's almost something similar. And so I thought it was very wise to have the housing people here. It was very wise to have the food assistance people, because water as a basic necessity is not constrained, to the utility service. It's something that encompasses the broader needs of decency, of health, and a lot of other things that are part of our social compact. It's a subconscious thing, but something that I think is very cherished.
I just want to maybe add a little bit, though, in that I think so water is this basic human right, this basic need, and so I appreciate all of those comments around that. I feel like, though, there are so many people going hungry in our state. There are so many people with our food delivery system. There are so many people without housing, and we're in crisis in our state on those issues. With water, we have a very fragmented, but water delivery system that's different than those two things, and it's a utility, right? And so I think when we look at utilities and we think about water as a utility and compare it to other utilities, where we need to we are doing programs like this in all other utilities. We're not doing it in water yet. And there's many reasons for that, I think, but I think that needs to change at this point. Water is different than the other utilities, and we're not starting from scratch. We've got, thousands and thousands of water providers, as opposed to the 7 or a few major energy utilities, but there's so that makes it, some things a lot simpler, and also I think is more that I think the type of thing that we need to be looking at is how are we making this utility service and providers part of solving, ensuring that everyone can access those services.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Right.
Actually, Jack Hawks, California Water Association. It's actually a request or a suggestion for the Water Board in the report. And that would be to reorient or orient the funding and financial discussion in the report to reflect the discussion of this panel here. Don and Laurel hit the nail on the head at the very beginning. Don, he picked up on my earlier question here about ratepayer and taxpayer funding in the very beginning, and Laurel picked up on it and talked about unfunded mandates. And poor Debbie was put on the defensive right in the beginning as a result of the first two comments here. And in retrospect, we shouldn't have allowed AB 401 to pass in the manner that it did. All of us in the community, we worked hard on that bill. But in retrospect, we should have actually, asked Les to spell out the funding options in more detail instead of leaving it open, because the whole debate for the past 2 years has been on the utilities and their customers doing the funding for this thing. And if we had laid out in the bill some state funding options as well as the utility options, the discussion the past 2 years would have been on how a LIRA program should actually mechanically be set up and operated. And we wouldn't have spent all this time these last 2 years, and the Water Board wouldn't have had so much trouble now with, getting this report out. And it seems to me if you all will focus the funding discussion on all of the observations that these three panelists made, at least we'll have an honest assessment amongst all of us in the utility and the water supplier and the water provider community with respect to the report when it comes out, and then we can face up to the funding and then perhaps move on to the mechanics of a statewide low-income program. We've just spent way too much time agonizing over the funding piece and not over the mechanical piece. So anyway, unfortunately, I'm ending this whole symposium on a down note, but I'm sitting back here and I got a little grumpy as I had to, a little more grumpy as I listened to this and got frustrated. So my apologies.
The comment was well received though, and when it comes to the report, it will have a suite and capture a lot of the dynamic discussion that's happened around what are the funding choices that the legislature will have when it comes to the program.
I know there are a couple extra hands. We're over time, so here's what I'd like to do. I think I'm going to speak for the panelists and say that they'll be willing to stick around for a few minutes, but I don't want to keep this whole thing going beyond the time we said it was going to go, even for you, Cindy, as much as I love you. And so, okay, yeah. Well, I'm gonna take the prerogative here to end on a positive note, and that's one of thanks to everyone who came and listened and participated today, to all of our great speakers and panelists, to everyone who tuned in on the webcast, but mostly to my staff. As you all know, it takes a lot to put one of these things together, and a lot of good work went into this. And there's one person in particular I just want to single out for praise, and that's Mary Yang, who really did a fantastic job pulling this together. So thank you, Mary. And like I said, many of us here will stick around afterwards if you want to come up and have additional questions. And this is not the end of this discussion. We're going to have more. As Joaquin said, we're going to do more public process. So thank you.
Thanks.